James, welcome to Breaking Par. Thanks so much for stopping by and chatting with us.
I appreciate the opportunity to be on. Thank you very much.
So, how long have you been a golf professional, and what really got you started into the game?
Well, first off, I started when I was very young, literally standing on the back of a pull cart, being drug around the course by my mother, as she played. So I grew up with it. My older brother, Tom, was on the tour for 11 years. And so, I had that a very strong influence by an older brother who's 10 years older. And I played college golf at Nebraska, and after that, professional golf in Asia and South America. And, those that can't play teach, I guess. So, after realizing I just didn't quite have what it took, I started teaching. That was probably 92 or 3 in earnest. So, it's been over 2 decades for sure.
And where are you teaching out of now?
I have a golf academy at a country club, nice country club in Omaha, Nebraska. It's called Sheridan Country Club. And I've been there for 20 years. So maybe a lifer there, who knows?
And do you have a lot of students of all different ages that you teach there, or are you primarily working more with juniors? Or
no, I would say that probably 90% of my clients are either pros, mini tour players, college players. I will teach a few members, but typically my typical clients flying in from somewhere, and I'm spending 5 to 8 hours with them, and they're after a competitive advantage. They're teeing up, trying to shoot a score, and they're trying to figure out how to do better.
Now, your new book is about short game, correct?
Yes, it's called Your Short Game Solution, Mastering the Finesse Game from 120 Yards and In, and came out March 3rd. It's available Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, anywhere fine book is sold, you could get it.
Awesome. And so are these professionals who are coming to see you, is that mainly what they're working on? Is that why they come to see you, to work on short game?
Yes, yeah. I hold myself to be a short game expert. So that would include basically distance wedges, which it's different for everybody, but maybe 40 to 120 yards, what I would call finesse wedge, inside 40, bunker shots, and putting.
Okay. So when you're doing that, is most of that conducted on the course when you're working with these guys?
No, I have an amazing practice facility at Shadow Ridge, and has a wedge range, bunker, my own little short game area, and we'll occasionally go out on the golf course. But in the early phases of a coaching session, typically you're just trying to get the plan in place. There needs to be complete understanding with not only regards to the technique, but strategies, adaptations for bad lies, training protocols, the mental component to competing at a high level. And so the golf course is not efficient when it comes to those type of things. That would be probably the next phase when they have it, they're working on it, and they're still struggling with maybe some situational type stuff where we go out on the course and do different types of lies and situations.
So if I was going to come to you for a lesson, let's say I was going to spend a day with you, what would a typical day be like? If let's say, because I'm coming in to work on short game and find out how I can manufacture different shots and do different things from different lies. So typically, what would we work on?
Well, the first thing, obviously, we assess you. I want to assess your mental state, talk to you about typical how you train, because those are all very important. And then what you're deficient at. And some people are, they may say, hey, listen, I putt really well from in close. I don't make anything 10 feet and out. And, I'm horrible in the bunker. I need to improve chipping. So we'll just go through those scenarios. And, of course, everybody's a little bit different. Typically, we might do 2 to 3 hours to try and get a plan in place, allow them to practice, work on their game, eat some lunch, kind of soak it in for maybe 2, 3, 4 hours, and then finish up in the afternoon or the next morning with a second session. That second session is really important because after the initial phase and a couple hours on their own, they'll figure out what they can do well and what they need work with, maybe what they don't quite understand or having trouble implementing.
Now, there's specific things that you do with them as a follow-up or give them things to work on in between the time that they see you, or are most of these lessons like one-offs?
No, I wouldn't say they're one-offs. Usually the people that are interested in coming are wanting a plan. And so at the conclusion of every lesson, it doesn't even matter really if it's an amateur or, like I said, my typical student is a pro or at least someone planning on being a pro, is I'm going to go in and I'm going to write down their technical components for them into a plan, the expected training, and I'll be very detailed in their training. What they should be doing daily, what should they be doing weekly, what should they be doing leading up to an event. And then we'll also the mental game exercises or components, things they need to improve. And so from that point forward, it's being accountable to the plan. So some of the tour players I coach, a lot of times I get an email after every round with an audio recording for this is what happened during the day, this is what I'm feeling. A lot of the college players will, send me their link to their stat program, so I'm checking their stats and their follow-up emails post-tournament. And, I'll even get texts like I'll maybe assign homework for you. You come to me, Bernard, and I say, okay, we're going to play a game called 21, which is a 9-hole up and in game with varying lies, and I'd create the structure. And that your responsibility is to text me your 21 score maybe 3 times a week. And so the benefit of that is, as a coach, is that if your student isn't willing to follow up and be accountable, then they're going to make you look bad anyway. So you don't want them as a student. And so one of the things I realized early on was that the better players, the more disciplined players I had, the smarter I looked. So I'm trying to pick my students well, so to speak.
Sure. So are a lot of these type, I guess, like games or little strategy things that you have them work on, is that to get them to feel a little bit more pressure when they're in these situations?
There's a couple things you can do when you structure a game, is that you can create a variety that maybe they're not doing themselves. So, for example, if they're not practicing anything but a standard bunker shot, a lot of times I'll do a game where it's a 6 lie condition game, and you're counting the total number of shots it takes you to hit a ball from a certain lie condition in a bunker. Let's say you start with an upslope to within 2 steps of a pin. And let's say it takes you 2 reps, 2 chances to hit one inside 6 feet. Now you work to the same pin from a downhill lie, a ball below, ball above, buried, and then maybe a normal shot, something like that. So you're ensuring that they're training for every situation, which is essentially what skill development is all about. It's making sure that you're developing skill. And if you're sitting in a pile hitting the same shot over and over again, you're neither working on your process or developing skill. You're just more or less wasting your time. So game playing is a way for a coach to create the proper learning structure to develop skill. Then also, when you have a well-designed game, it boosts the intensity and the focus of the training session, which is also valuable.
Now, do you ever have them do games with other players where they're kind of doing things to compete against each other, or is it always like them against their own score? Or, because I know that when I work with a couple of different players that know each other, sometimes I'll have them do stuff together. Yeah, it keeps them a little bit more interested. I guess, though, when you're talking about a higher level player, they really don't need much to keep them interested because they want to be a high level player, so they got a tremendous amount of interest to begin with.
That's true, except for the competitive juices that flow in that type of player are very high, and when you can pit them against somebody else that's like-minded that they want to beat, there's no question that type of practice has the most value. So yeah, if I'm this spring, I had Charlie Hoffman and Tom Pernice out doing these little finesse games, and they competed each other for several hours, and they were both trying to win so badly, and that is exactly what the feelings that they get there, and the intensity is exactly what they do when they play. So you're trying to rep that as much as you can, and so competition is probably the best form of practice.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I know that when I, when my higher ranked players or my players who are better players, I try to get them to be as competitive as possible. But then I also try to get my players who are higher handicapped to be competitive with players that are close to them or a little bit better, because it seems to help them. It makes them raise their game. And sometimes I think when that pressure is on them, they have a tendency to rise to the occasion or cave. And I think that a lot of them can do a lot more because of that, just for the fact that they're pushing themselves harder, as opposed to when you're by yourself, it's kind of hard to push yourself.
Yeah, it is. It's easy to lose interest, lose focus. You know, you think you're working hard. It's like going to the gym by yourself. You think you're doing it, but the reality, are you really working hard? You're not nearly working as hard as if you had a coach or trainer or a buddy there taking your money, you know. So the reality is that as a coach, we try and structure whatever we can to create value for our player.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about this book and some of the things that are really, you know, I know that we said it's about short game, but and there's also putting in there, correct?
No, this particular, I mean, I'm doing another book out next year on putting, but this one is just about wedge play from 120 yards and in. You know, I start to tell a little bit about how I came up with the methods that I teach, which I would say are probably a little bit unusual, and talk about you know, where they are born, how the different players I coach, especially on tour, use those techniques to hit different shots around the greens. We talk about not just technique and having a way to understand what your misses mean, but also ways to adapt for different conditions. So I talk a lot about different lies and what to do, because that's a big thing. You know, some people, they can hit a basic shot, but they don't know what to do when the ball's buried in the rough into the grain, or, you know, so I try and go through all those things. And then you know, I'm a performance coach, as we all are. So I go through the mental aspects and the training aspects.
So is there in that book also, are there like scenarios that you put in that book for players to try to work on, or to you know, or to figure out, or say, hey, you know, yeah, I want you to do this, I want you to do this, I want you to do this? Or is it more of an instructional type book where if you're up against a shot that's in this type of situation, then this is your best bet?
Well, I like to think it's both. It's probably more the former, where if I would talk about base, let's just talk about common things that derail a simple finesse shot from 10 yards. And we talk about the critical parts of the setup. Well, I would describe what those are, and then more importantly, everybody thinks they're doing well, but the reality is they can't see themselves, and because of that, they have no idea where they're falling short. So I might give them practice protocols to check to make sure that every element in the setup is correct. It might be getting in front of a mirror and standing up and going through certain steps, you know, dropping your left foot back a little bit, opening your chest a little bit, and then swinging and checking the plane of your swing in a mirror, checking what the face looks like. And I'll give them certain checkpoints. So if they're disciplined enough and like-minded, they want to pay attention to the details and get it right, they have the practice protocols to do that. And then I always feel too that the most important thing is for players to be able to self-coach. In other words, they need to understand what their misses mean. So I might have a section there. It's like, okay, if you're hitting behind the ball and you're also hitting weak shots to the right, then these are the two possibilities. So let's go through and check these two and see which one has the biggest effect. And then I would put that one into their practice training program.
Sure.
So I've tried to be very thorough in this book, and really it's not a cookie cutter. It's trying to figure out what each person needs to do to get better.
Now, when you're doing any of these short game lessons, is there any time that you're using any type of technology to gather information, or is it all with no technology, where you're out there just doing, it's wedges and you and the player?
Well, you know that a lot of the radar stuff is not very good inside 40 yards. Matter of fact, you can't get good club data inside 40 yards. So that I do not use. I do use video, and I know that two-dimensional stuff sometimes can be not completely accurate, but you know, it seems to be working for me. I'll say this, and then I'm not so sure I would even use the radar stuff from 10 yards and figure out what the angle of attack is and the spin and the face, because I think it becomes such a distraction and a drug for a lot of players. The reality is there's a very little science involved in a 10-yard shot. There's pieces that fit together and there's pieces that don't. And if you can kind of just get your pieces to fit together and get the right contact and the movement, control, whether it's trajectory or distance, then it's really more about judgment, which is a skill. And you're not teaching a skill on a TrackMan. You know, that's about reading the lie and figuring out what the rollout's going to be and be able to hit any trajectory that you want. And I just feel like that it's best to teach art just by doing a lot of art and having somebody there that knows it to kind of push you in the right direction.
Sure. And that's what I thought would be your answer, because I know that that is true, that launch monitors, once you're in a certain distance, they're really not seeing what the heck is going on. They're not very accurate in measuring that information. And your best really is, your best judge for that would be, what is the ball doing, and is the ball doing what you want it to do? Is it landing where you want it to land? Is it rolling out the way you want it to roll out? Is it releasing? Is it checking up? Things like that. Do you work with these guys on angle of attack and things of that nature? And do you switch up different clubs? Or are they always using wedges? You know, because I mean, I know there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. So.
Right. No, my guys are changing trajectories and wedges on every shot. So, you know, out with the lofted club, I will typically teach, you know, there might be 100 trajectories, but I'm going to basically teach 4. And then even with an 8-iron, I want you to be able to hit that shot a little higher or lower than normal. So there would be at least 3 trajectories with an 8-iron. And then, you know, it's exactly, I think I forgot the first part of your question, but there's definitely art involved to how
angle of attack?
Yes, sir. So the correct angle of attack for a finesse shot, let's say inside 30 yards, is very close to 6 degrees. And when it's easiest to kind of understand poor contact and poor performance by angle of attack errors. So there are different, you know, an angle that would come in too low, the ground would be too shallow. One that would come in 10 or 12 degrees down would be too steep. And if you do something in your backswing in your setup that would be a shallow element, like setting up closed or behind the ball, and then take it inside, which would also be a shallow element, then it's very likely you might be too shallow to make good contact. So we do talk, I want my players to understand their misses, so they need some rudimentary ways to judge how the contact is, and we talk in terms of being steep or shallow.
Now, in these short shots, is the arms more what are doing the work with finesse, or does the torso and, you know, core start to get more involved? And when does that happen? Does that happen after 10 yards? Does it happen at 20? Is it, or maybe doesn't it? Maybe the core is not involved until the hands reach 9 o'clock, or I know that there's a lot of different people who have different outlooks on this, and I'm just kind of curious as to what your outlook would be.
Well, I did some real 3D kinematic testing at the Taos Performance Institute, and that's a big part of the book, actually, where I have, I don't want to say proven, because that's a strong word, but let's just say that Luke Donald, Tom Pernice, Corey Pavin, Steve Stricker, Podrick Harrington, the who's who of wedge play have the opposite kinematic sequence from 10 yards that they do from 200. And so to answer your question is that from 70 yards, the kinematic sequence in wedge play is identical to the full swing. The body basically is the motor, it's the engine. And the dynamic stretching is not quite there. It's not quite as dynamic as what a 200-yard shot would be, but it's definitely the same sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's dead opposite from 10 yards, where the start of the downswing, what a great player like Tom Pernice would do from 10 yards would actually, the club moves faster than the arm. It starts first. The body is very quiet. And you actually cast the club a little at the start of your downswing. Then the lead arm and the chest kind of pick up that energy and accelerate past the ball. And the club moves the fastest. So there's extension or release through the shot, in my opinion. So that's why I call it a finesse shot, because it's a finesse sequence that creates the optimal wedge motion, in my opinion, from 10 yards. And then that does flip at 70. So then the real question is, okay, so if it's full swing at 70 and it's a finesse sequence at 10, where's the transition? Mm. Is there another sequence in there somewhere? Well, the reality is that's a little bit different for everybody. I would say for most of my tour players, they transition at like 40 to 50 to 60 yards. For a lot of the better amateur players, it might be more like 30, 40, 50. And certainly there's a certain distance where you can cover it with either sequence. So a finesse sequence shot from 50 yards for me would launch high. It would have very little spin, but it's still going to come down softly because of the trajectory. A power sequence, maybe like a little 730 or belly button backswing where I use my body to generate force and deal off the club. Because you're compressing the ball and you're hitting on the bottom of the face, it will launch much lower and spin much more. And so that shot's going to do a little one hop and kind of stop or quick come to a little skid. And that'd probably be better for a middle pin or a back pin from that distance. So the reality is, the sequence to some extent kind of controls the trajectory and the spin rate.
Now, in that sequencing, when you tested that, what's going on with actual weight shift in those type of shots, and are they predominantly on their front foot when they make contact or impact?
Yeah, the center of pressure, which is basically the forces running down through your feet, mm-hmm. Flows towards the pin. So in a setup for a 10-yard shot, the weight is essentially even. It's not left. Amateurs lean left because they've been told that, but I think that's wrong. Mm-hmm. The weight's even. Then in the backswing, there's actually a center pressure shift towards the target. So there's a slight reverse weight shift. So now there might be 60 on the lead foot. And as you deliver the club and the chest is rotating and everything's kind of turning that way, the center pressure moves even further forward. So the weight might be 70, 80, 90% on the lead foot in the follow through. So it starts 50 and through the reverse and then the release, it flows that way. And the longer the distance shot, the more the pressure shifts. So it would shift less on a 5-yard carry shot than it would on a 30-yard carry shot.
Now, in most of those players also, what about center of mass? What's going on with that? Is that pretty much stabilized?
No, it's definitely moving left as well.
Okay.
It's moving towards the target. So if you took a spot on there, your xiphoid recess right here, or it's easier to see the head. If you watch Tom Pernice, since my head's in the screen here, the backswing of his head would go forward, mm-hmm. and then the follow through it would stay forward or maybe even move slightly more forward. Anytime in the finesse game you see a head going down and back, it's just a debilitating mistake. Usually causing, poor contact, fat, thin. Sure.
Well, it changes the bottom of the swing arc, and it also, I say most of the time thinner. So, but I understand all this, but I want to make sure that I'm asking these questions to you so that our listeners can kind of get that solidified in their mind as to kind of what should be happening. I totally agree with you that with the weight on your front foot at address in short shots is really not necessary, but that the dynamic movement of the body and the movement towards the target is going to make that happen through the swing.
Right, and the energy always flows that way. A lot of people that start left in the middle, they try and find balance in the middle, and they end up kind of falling back. And so you watch the good players, they start level, and then, like I said, they flow that way. And the other thing is that the best players, in my opinion, all release the club naturally through the bottom of the swing, and most of us have been taught to keep your hands ahead and hold on, which I feel is very destructive. Anytime anybody's backing up this way, they're going to hold, they're going to hold their release to make up for it. Those two kind of offset each other. Well, even if you can't get the ball first, the ball's coming out low and hot with not much, soft touch or feel to it. And so one of the things, getting the center of pressure moving forward, what I like to say is energy kind of flows towards the pin. That creates a situation where you can kind of let the club head go or release naturally without hitting behind the ball.
Now, for our average players, to get that feeling, would it be kind of like if they had a ball in their hand and they were going to kind of throw the ball in a trajectory? Would they feel that way, or would it be or there would be something that would be another good way for them to do that?
No, that's exactly right. And I'm going to actually, I know this may be a disaster, but I'm going to try and stand up and actually do that little exercise.
Okay.
All right. And I'll try and stay in the frame. But if you got a ball with your right hand and you're just going to hit a little 5-yard shot, you wouldn't. If you were going to throw it 5 yards, you wouldn't turn your body in the backswing. You just, do it with your arm.
Right.
So big mistake a lot of people do is they turn way too much. So it's just like a little throw here. And if you're going to throw it, your arm would start. You wouldn't fire your hips. Your arm would start. Then your chest would pick up the energy. And as you release the club, there's the release. Just kind of this like simple little throw. Your chest turns to support, and you can see the energy is moved towards the pin. And so for a beginner to learn the proper motion, that little simple trail arm little toss, and just being aware of where the energy flows, maybe posing the finish and asking yourself, okay, I started 50-50 weight-wise, now what is it? If the answer is 70 or 80 on the lead foot, you basically have got it.
Well, I know that most of the students that I deal with, they've all thrown a ball. They've all pitched horseshoes. They've all done any of those type of things. And if I get them to do that motion, then I say, look at how natural that was. And then I try to get them to feel that same motion in their short game or even a little bit bigger swing. But of course, like you said, a lot of times they try to rotate too much or they try to overdo it. And I think they also try to think about it. Whereas in that situation, if you put a ball in their hand, they don't think about it at all because they've already done that. That's already in their brain. They don't, it's something that they're familiar with. Do you think that that's a good way for the intermediate player who has problems with short game to work on those type of things, to kind of start to get the feel of that weight transfer in short shots?
Yeah, it's an amazing way for a beginning player to play. For an intermediate player, typically what I would do is I'd basically give them the same concept, but I'd have them hit them trail arm only chip shots, finesse shots. And most of them hit them unbelievable, trail arm only, and then they put their lead arm on there and the whole thing falls apart. But I think the major point, one of the things you're trying to talk about is the external cues, throwing a ball 5 yards down the range or visualizing something that's happening outside your body, having a picture. It's so much more effective as far as learning compared to having an internal cue, like thinking about your elbow, your arm, your head, or even what the club is doing. But unfortunately, a lot of teachers will say, okay, lean left, put your hands ahead, don't let the club pass, which besides being all horrible information, is just horrible coaching because they get them thinking way too much about mechanics that have very little to do with what's going to happen to the ball. And if you said, hey, you know what, just pretend like you got a ball in your trail hand, you're going to throw it out on the green, that's just a better, more effective job of coaching.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that a lot of information, as a matter of fact, I had an interview earlier today, and the gentleman said to me that only 11% of players who play this game take lessons. And I think that what you just said, that sometimes when this information is doled out kind of willy-nilly or just the way that they've been told by instructors or what they think should happen, and they really didn't dive in and study it as much. That maybe that might be part of the reason why there's only 11%. But thank God that there's guys like you out there who are producing books that students, that people who are interested in learning can read and get a little bit more of real solid information that has taken you, years of teaching and working with different students and working with high-ranked players and studying what they do and then translating that information to them so that they can get a little bit more better information. Hopefully that'll start to infiltrate other instructors too.
I think it is, and I think it has. I see. Well, first off, I would say that's exactly right. I think the history of our profession is basically broken in that we mean well, but we teach and we don't coach. Think of any other sport. Think of Coach K running a practice at Duke, and he gets the guy for 1 hour, an incoming freshman. He has to teach him everything he needs to do to be successful. And if he's lucky, he'll see him 6 weeks later, Yeah. That's not what happens. He sees them every day. There's follow-up. There's accountability. There's homework assignments. There's, he gets to see him and touch him every day. And you can say, well, there's a barrier to that, and it's a financial barrier. But there's other things we can do, like I mentioned, whether it's practice protocols, follow-up emails, video, statistical things and I think more, especially the younger generation of coaches, and that's not me. I'm an old guy, but
me too.
They kind of get the coaching aspect of it. They're thinking about being coaches instead of, at least the top ones are, and I think it's getting better. I really do. Now, unfortunately, I also feel like science is good. I used it in my book to clearly show that the best players in the world from 10 yards do it differently than they do from 70. I think that's great information that would help any kind of player, whether it's a beginner, average, or advanced. However, I think sometimes the technology gets overworked and overused, and where they're losing kind of the art and feel of how to play. And so one of the challenges in our coaching profession is to me, I always look like the technology is for the coach. It's not for the player.
I agree.
It's an assessment tool for me.
Yeah.
You don't need to see what happens every shot. Let me guide you. But I think a lot of the teachers use it as the wrong way. And now the students are getting addicted to it, and they're kind of losing the feel for the art of golf.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And I believe that as an instructor who has technology, it's like a doctor who has technology. And that doctor does not always give that information technically wise to their patient. And I don't want to say they dumb it down, but what they do is they only give them information that is pertinent to what they want them to do or to fix whatever the problem is that they have. And they don't say, well, there's all these numbers here, and your cholesterol is this, and this is that, and this is that, and that's this, and this is that. So you have to watch this number here, and you got to make sure that you do this to fix that number. And so now all of a sudden it's really just a crazy. Yes, it gets very. I mean, golf is complicated enough as it is. So if we can make that a little bit easier, then it's much better. But
you want to make it simple. At the end of the day, I want to be able. I want to know everything. I want to know it A to Z. But I want you to know and do these three things, because if you do these three things, you're going to be fine. And believe me, that's what the people want too.
I agree. Make it simple. So thanks so much for being with us, James. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Before we leave, what I would like you to do is just give us a little bit of information as to if anybody out there in our listening audience wants to hear, come and see you or work with you. What is the best way that they can get in touch with you?
Right. The best way is just to go to my website. It's JSEGolfacademy.com. And I have contact. There's a way for them to email me there, my direct line to my office number. And if they're interested in getting the book, if any of that sounded interesting, it's I think there's ordering information there. But you don't have to order it from me. You can get it pretty much anywhere.
And you said that the book is available. Give us the name of the book one more time
so
they know.
Your Short Game Solution. And it's Mastering the Finesse Game, 120 yards and in, and it's available Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, anywhere. It should be in every major book outlet.
Fantastic. I'll definitely pick it up on iTunes. I know that because it'll be great insight for me to pass along to my students. So, James, thanks so much, and as we say here at Breaking Par, try to keep it in the short grass.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, take
appreciate
care.
it.